Fantastic. All right. Good morning and welcome. I'm Austin Holmes, your host of the Dallas Housing Coalition's Housing for All webinar series and a senior development associate at Dominium. On behalf of Dominium, I also serve as a member of the Dallas Housing Coalition Steering Committee. Today is the 43rd installment of the Housing for All webinar series, sponsored by Dominium, where we discuss whether Dallas is big and if it is truly big enough for everyone. We hope you've been enjoying these impactful one-on-one conversations with DHC members and other community leaders who are Dallas's strongest advocates to keep Dallas affordable. Today, we are turning the tables to DHC's executive director, the man behind the camera, Brian Toney, on the hot seat to recap the coalition's advocacy trip to Austin and the inaugural Housing Day at the Dome, held this past Tuesday, May the 6th. You already know him from his past 3 years organizing the Dallas Housing Coalition, but please join me in welcoming Brian to the show as a guest. How you doing today, Brian?
Doing well. This is my first time appearing as a guest, so it's good to be on this side of the script, so to say.
Awesome. Well, we're really excited for it. You do so much work in the community with DHC, pushing various things forward, and so I think this will be a great conversation and opportunity for a lot of folks to learn about some of that work that you're doing. So to start out, Brian, can you set the stage for us? What inspired the Dallas Housing Coalition to organize this advocacy trip to Austin during the final weeks of the legislative session?
Yep, this was our first session active as a coalition. We got launched as a coalition most around a local campaign for bond funding back in June of 2023. And we put these processes in place where we could ask our members, what should we get involved in next? We jumped in at Forward Dallas for the comprehensive land use plan update. And then that passed in September of 2024. And in January is when the legislative session started. So we asked our members again, is this something that you think that the coalition should be active and engaging in? And our members resoundingly said, absolutely, housing needs to be a bigger priority at the state level. So, and talking to some other, organizations, we wanted to put together a day where our members could experience the Capitol for themselves. And we've been sending out our monthly newsletters and weekly advocacy updates to try and keep everybody in the loop about what's happening in Austin. But there's really no comparison to getting the chance to go down there yourself and meet staff and hear those conversations that can only happen while you're in Austin. So I was really glad that we got to put this together.
That's amazing. That's amazing. From what I understand, this was really a multi-city effort. Can you speak about how, the Dallas Housing Coalition collaborated with Austin and San Antonio to bring advocates together? And what do you feel, the Dallas Housing Coalition really brought to the table in that?
Yeah, I'm really proud of our whole coalition, all the members. We had 32 people who were able to make it on the bus. And, we were a little uncertain with the weather forecast on Monday. And thankfully, it held out for us long enough that we could board and get there safely. So uh, and I, as an organizer and executive director, I'm always looking at what other cities are doing, whether it's Atlanta, San Francisco, Seattle, Milwaukee. Groups like ours in Austin and San Antonio and Houston have predated our formation. So we can look at their best practices and think about, are they set up and borrow and make it our own. So during the session, we stayed in touch with groups like Texans for Housing, Housing Works Austin, Texans for Reasonable Solutions. There are other groups like Strongtown San Antonio,
Mhm.
and Aura, which is a Austin for Everyone group that all have been active. And so we thought if we could blanket the entire state,
Yeah.
in one whole day, that would mean everybody's hearing about housing that day.
Yeah.
Uh, so we probably started planning in March, I think, towards
Okay.
the end of March, and figuring out what this could look like. Uh, Put together the itinerary. I think we had like two planning calls, so everyone was kind of self-guided.
Mhm.
We were responsible for setting up our own meetings and creating our preparatory materials, but
Hmm.
we all had the same cover page that we brought into our meetings and our office visits with those legislators. So we
Yeah,
all had the same, kind of top 8 bills that we were making sure our staffs and legislators heard about that day, which
got
helped.
it. That makes sense. That makes sense. I think you started the day with a special moment on the House floor. What was it like to be recognized by Representative Rafael Anchia, and what did the acknowledgement mean to the coalition?
It's huge for us. I think Representative Rafael Anchia, he's going on 20 years in the state ledge. He's looked on as a senior leader in the House, especially representing Dallas. To have someone of our own who took the time to put pen to paper and draft a resolution, and then when they get the opportunity to do a congratulatory resolution, they go up to the podium at the front of the House floor, and then other members can stand behind them and show solidarity and support. So,
Mhm.
would also like to shout out Representatives Linda Garcia and Tony
Mhm.
Rose, who stood behind him as he, looked up at us in the rafters and,
Yeah,
waved, and we stood up and he read the resolution, and hopefully it's going to go on, these walls of our new offices
yeah,
once we get it printed and framed. So I'm excited for that. Definitely a huge honor. And for several of our members, it was their first time in the Capitol, first time advocating.
yeah.
I think, it couldn't have been a better way to start the day.
That's amazing. That's amazing. I definitely would love to see that framed, see that up there in the new office spaces. That's awesome. So let's get into, some of the details of the legislation that's been moving. Can you tell us about the momentum surrounding House Bill 24, which passed the House floor that afternoon? What does the passage of that bill mean for Dallas neighborhoods? And was this a priority for the Dallas Housing Coalition?
Yeah, I think it is. House Bill 24 is one that kind of updates a law that allowed for 20% of a surrounding property of a rezoning case, a small, group of people to potentially block more housing that's affordable to them, or
Mhm.
a medical center, which is how that law was used in Dallas a few years ago.
Wow.
And so there's different, reasons why, people do that, but if we believe in a fair democratic kind of majority rule process as a city or as a state or as a country, then we need to update those laws that were written in the 1920s and Jim
Yeah.
Crow, and bring them into, if 60% of your surrounding property owners say no, then okay, maybe there's, some kind of issue here. But this bill, it's unfortunately being, or and without the loophole, or what we're trying to do now is make it so that there is more notice. There's a way that people can still protest a rezoning, especially like in an industrial and a casino
Yeah.
case, which was an amendment made on the floor while we were there on Tuesday. So we got to
Hmm.
see this in
See it in action.
time. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I think it'll also be helpful as Dallas starts to look at its development code rewrite next
Mhm.
year, and our mixed income housing density bonus program has been very highly successful. So we want to
Yeah.
do things that can accelerate and streamline the development of attainable housing for
Yeah.
people of all incomes, all stages of life. So this was the first bill that has now passed both chambers,
Yeah.
which I think is a good sign. And
Hmm.
we have, a few others that we hope will, make it to the finish line
Yeah.
now that we're just basically 3 weeks out from the end of session.
For sure. For sure. And so to really understand the bill and what it'll enable, it'll kind of lower the threshold level in terms of protest for potential rezonings. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, right now it's gonna, however way you want to look at it, it'll either it's raising the threshold from 20% to 60% of a surrounding property owners.
Got
And
it.
it's
Okay.
lowering the threshold if there is that much protesting, that the city council has to no longer get a super
Super
majority
majority.
to
Okay.
overrule that protest.
Yeah.
It can also just overrule it with a simple majority.
Got
So
it.
it's a
Okay.
kind of a Texas two-step in terms of
Yeah.
what has to happen there. But
Okay.
overall, it's a good bill that we're excited to see pass.
That's really exciting. That is cool because the even if you lower the threshold in terms of raise the threshold in terms of the protest, there's still the ability to do that protest, and it's still, like you said, a majority rules situation, and so that makes sense. And again, it's still a majority rules situation when you go to council. Even if you don't need the supermajority, you still need the majority to get anything done. So the bill seems, as it's written, does seem to still allow for protest and debate back and forth, but ultimately the majority will rule the day, and that's really how things probably should be. And so that's amazing that's moving forward.
Or
At
people
the
literally jumping for joy at our
Yeah,
happy hour at the end of the
that's
day.
awesome. We love to hear that. Love to
Yeah.
hear that. On the day that you went down to the Capitol, you met with 75 legislative offices. That's a ton. That's a lot. That's a big, impressive number. What was your overall message to the lawmakers that you were speaking with, and how would you say that message was received?
Yeah. Well, it takes teamwork. So thankfully, we split our own delegation into teams of 10 or 10 teams of three.
Okay.
And then we had the Austin folks talk to their legislators, and then the Houston folks talk to theirs. We had some people working in the Valley in South Texas. So
Mhm.
uh, thankfully, yeah, we were able to cover a lot of ground. But I think remarkably, across the whole, everybody was really glad to see us. They knew that housing has been a talking point more
Yeah.
this session and than any other previous session. So to know that
Mhm.
there is a group like the Dallas Housing Coalition or Habitat for Humanity Texas, whose shirt I'm wearing today, like they all recognized and appreciated that we're advocating for homes. We need to cut through red tape,
Yeah.
that there is no longer uh, we can't just rely on local municipalities necessarily to solve this problem by themselves or on their own,
Yeah.
because everyone is looking to the next city over like, oh, you build this housing that
Yeah.
you need for your residents. We're not going to, we're good with ours. And so this creates that kind of collective impact problem that, the state intervention, I think, will help solve
Yeah.
in the near future. So um, most of the staffers were very understanding. Many of them are future first-time home buyers or
Yeah.
dealing with high rents themselves in
Yeah.
Austin. Occasionally, we got the chance to talk to a member and see where they stood on, uh, or if they had any questions on these bills, that they could ask us. So I think it was
Mhm.
really a lot of information gathering. And now that we've, for many cases, this is kind of the second or third contact they might have had with the coalition. We
Yeah.
can follow up with them again in the final few weeks of session.
Definitely. That makes a ton of sense. Were there any particular areas of pushback that you got that you wanted to highlight just in terms of how people are thinking about some of these housing issues?
Yeah, I would say you kind of had to know your audience. There were some, if you were talking to a Republican office versus a
Yeah.
Democrat office, you might approach the local control conversation a little bit differently.
Makes
You
sense.
might also want to make like an economic case, like,
Yeah.
what's the return on investment for this state?
Hmm.
Why uh, how does this help us stay competitive economically with other states or
Yeah.
recruit corporate headquarter relocations? We hear a lot about freedom and opportunities. So, for example, with the accessory dwelling unit bill, like this is about property rights. Like you should be able to build a secondary unit on your property if you
Yeah.
would like to. So, I think there were concerns that some had or questions about local control and what's going
Hmm.
to be the impact on different neighborhoods. But for
Yeah.
these bills, including Senate Bill 15, this is new neighborhoods. This is unplatted land. We're
Mm.
trying to make better use of the existing land we do have as a
Yeah.
state, so we can all achieve the goals that we have in common.
Definitely, definitely. And I really appreciate you outlining kind of that framing piece, because I do think, a lot of these housing issues, housing's complicated, and housing isn't something that's a simple left or right type of a thing.
Yeah.
There are aspects to all sorts of these policies and things that everyone agrees, no matter what side you're on, that we can do better, and that different sides can attach to and find pieces of that they appreciate. So I really hear that, and it's really important to be able to think that way and when doing the work you're doing. So that's really cool.
Yeah, I
Um,
appreciate that. And House Bill 24 passed with majority of both parties voting
yeah,
in favor of it. So
yeah.
bipartisanship all the way, like you said.
Definitely, definitely. So, aside from HB 24, the coalition advocated for seven other bills. Could you
Mhm.
walk us through, one or two that you see as especially transformative for housing for us here in Dallas?
Yeah, for sure. Senate Bill 15 is that smaller lot size bill for
Hmm.
new neighborhoods over 5 acres. I think
Okay,
we'll see that one come forward in the next week or two.
nice.
It has a low bill number as a lieutenant governor priority. We're also closely monitoring, and I think would be really beneficial, is Senate Bill 840, which would allow residential or mixed use development on underused commercial land near
Nice.
jobs and near transit. There are certain retail centers that are outdated
Yeah.
that might have a taxable value of $3 million, but if all of a sudden we could bring in some housing and other amenities there, that taxable value of the land could go up. You create more housing for people, which we're short 320,000 homes
Yeah.
across the state. So that's a win-win. I think that would be good. Mentioned the ADU bill
Yep.
673. And then if we get some other, tweaks like a single stair bill that
Mm.
allows apartments to be up to
Yep.
5 stories with only one staircase, like they have in New York and Austin and other places, that'd be great. If we get some funding for single family home ownership development, Senator Royce West has a bill 208 that would create a $50 million revolving loan fund for
Wow.
qualified nonprofit developers to build affordable home ownership. Those would be, icing on the cake,
Yeah.
so to speak. And I think they do still have a good chance of passing. And we'll be
Mhm.
sending out action alerts from the Dallas Housing Coalition. People can subscribe online, of course, or on our social media. We'll try and do a little bit more of that as we get to this kind of fourth quarter or crunch time that we're in now.
Yeah, that's very cool. Some of those bills that you mentioned would be really impactful. Some folks don't sometimes realize some minor changes, some smaller lot sizes or, the single stair bill or making the rezoning process easier by allowing, residential in certain areas. They're subtle changes, but can really just have a huge impact in making housing more realistic to get built. So that's very, very cool, and love to see some more of those bills move forward. One of the bills you talked about was one that promoted, new housing types, townhomes, ADUs, single stair apartments.
Yep.
Um, can you speak, I guess, more specifically on why that sort of reform is crucial for a city like Dallas?
Yep. In Dallas, starting with the starter home bill, SB 15, the American Enterprise Institute thinks that under current lot size requirements, Dallas could build 26,000 homes. With this new, if SB 15 were to pass, we could go
Yeah,
upwards of 120,000 new homes. So we're
big
talking about
difference.
4 times more
Yeah.
homes in our city, which would bring housing prices down. And
Yep.
they'll take time for this to develop, and not every site is going to be the perfect site for a developer to take advantage of this. But the point
Mm.
is, we need to be giving flexibility and say you cannot require these lots to be greater than 1,400 square feet. You can still
Yeah.
have a developer who will build bigger lots, but
Mhm.
they just need that kind of flexibility, um, built in. So um, that one I think is especially applicable to Dallas. The accessory dwelling unit conversation. Um, Unfortunately, our city and the Dallas Housing Coalition might not be on the same page with it, and
Yeah.
they're I understand the position that the city of Dallas is in, trying to maintain its control over its own zoning. Uh, However, it's more difficult for city government and even some of our elected officials at the local level to make bold moves when
Yeah.
we have 8% voter turnout in May elections, which will hopefully change through another bill this session to November elections. Um, because it's making it more difficult to build ADUs in Dallas. We have a
Yeah.
really long process where you have to get your Board of Adjustments approval and neighbors approval. And so we haven't seen new ADUs built at all in the city of Dallas. There are very
Mm.
few. Uh, and this bill and other states that have legalized ADUs from the coast have built thousands of new units. And so again, this doesn't mean that an ADU is going to appear in your neighbor's backyard overnight. It's
Yeah.
simply giving some people the flexibility, if they have the means, or if the city can, come up with some standard templates or funding for ADUs, that we might have one or two ADUs pop up in a neighborhood, and you won't even know the difference. But
Yeah.
in many cases, they already exist in Dallas. So
Yeah.
we think it's a good thing. Our members agree.
For sure.
Hopefully that one, passes. And then
Mm.
these smaller apartment complexes, like you mentioned, Dallas just recently made a change a few weeks ago that now anything under 8 units is in our residential building code
Okay.
versus our commercial building code, which had, things that were the same as our Chase Tower downtown, or
Mhm.
larger apartments were the same kind of fire safety walls,
Yeah.
air requirements, even though studies show that that has no impact on life
Obviously
safety now.
different. Yeah.
So it's a good time for that bill to pass, and might help us, with some smaller housing development under
Mhm.
8 units or more. But
Yeah.
there are two different versions of that bill. One's an opt-in and one's a requirement. So we'll see which one ends up going the distance, if either.
Yeah, that's very cool. And on some things that you said, the flexibility is so important. And you can argue that's even, a very, market-based way to figure things out. If single stair apartments or the smaller lot sizes weren't, a profitable venture, folks wouldn't do them. And so by just simply enabling them, you're not forcing someone to do that. You're just letting, the market say, hey, this is desired or this isn't desired. And if it is desired, then, we should allow for that. And on your other point about voter turnout, that's so huge. I think sometimes it's lost on folks how few people vote in some of these elections, and that really does sometimes hurt our local officials' ability to make bold moves, because it might be something that, if you did a broad reaching poll, over 50% of people support, but if that over 50% isn't voting and just a very small subset votes, and that very small subset feels differently, then it really, restricts some of our officials' ability to make some of these moves that might ultimately be popular in the broader community. So
Yeah,
little plug to make sure we get out and vote.
definitely. We have two runoff elections in Dallas. I know you'll be talking hopefully to those candidates on this webinar in a few weeks. So
Yes, sir.
uh, good
Definitely.
luck, good time. And then
Super
we do have
important.
some survey data too at DallasHousingCoalition.com, like you mentioned, of the number of Texans who support these housing reforms.
Mhm.
So it's a pop
Exactly.
window anytime somebody goes to our website currently.
Perfect. Perfect. So, while you were in Austin, it did rain, but the mood was not dampened at all, as far as I understand. So could you give us any great moments, funny moments, weird things that happened while you were on the trip?
I think my favorite part was on the bus ride back. We had like an open mic time for people to do reflections, and we had
Mm.
uh, a few of our members, Julio Acosta, share some words of encouragement from Dallas Eviction Advocacy Center, Reverend Billy Lane, who's on our board and executive director of Intercity CDC, gave a shout out to one of the people, a new member of the Dallas Housing Coalition who just joined, Kamsha Ward, at Mercy to Me Transitional Services. If you're watching, Kamsha, Billy, said you did amazing. We're so excited to have you as a new member of the coalition, and showing up for your community. And then I think we had another new member, Taylor Campbell from JTE Development, uh,
Yep.
who, this is, people are just diving in and said, I could see myself doing this full time too. So I was like,
Yeah.
okay, like we need housing advocates in, your profession, Austin, and all the, careers, anybody can be a housing advocate. They just need to,
They just
learn
need
about the issue and find out
Yeah.
how.
And go to our website.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. That's amazing. I mean, it's really great to hear about more people jumping in, because it's, there's there's just more work to be done, and all the hands make the load lighter. How can Dallas residents who weren't in Austin still support the coalition's work and these legislative priorities?
Yeah, we are still recapping a little bit. We've shared our photos. We shared a couple news coverage on our websites and social media yesterday. We just had an article published in Dallas Observer that we'll be resharing on our social media shortly. So like, comment, share those posts when you see them. That helps, everybody's eyes get on the issue of housing and this trip as a whole.
Yeah.
I think you can also, of course, in our advocacy updates, contact your legislators, call and email. If you're in Austin, making an in-person visit goes a long way as well. And then joining the coalition, just getting more involved with us. Like, we don't want this to be a flash in a pan or a
Yeah.
strike of lightning. We want this to be a sustained movement. We have 300 more members and always room for more.
Perfect. Perfect. So with the legislative session coming to an end, what are the next steps in the coalition's goals to advancing these housing reforms as we close
Yeah,
out?
we will be letting our people know when they're coming up for votes on the House floors and sending out action alerts so that you know exactly when they're being voted on. We covered a lot of bills today, and that's a very small percentage of the total number of bills that were proposed, and what they have a few weeks left to get through. So stay on the lookout for those action alerts, and then I think that's a big one. Just
Yeah.
the action alerts, because now's the time, and
Yeah.
don't get this chance again for another 2 years. So
Exactly. Yeah. No,
be
this is
ready.
for sure crunch time. So if we can, make an impact, make those calls, get those visits in, share, everything we can to get the eyes on these things so they vote that right way that supports more housing. All those things would be fantastic, for us to get these things to move forward. Because as you said, it's, next shots in a couple of years. So you want to get it while we can and while we have some momentum and progress moving forward. So fantastic. Well, Brian, is there anything else from the trip that you want to share as we close up here?
I think it was a great trip, and look forward to doing it again. And thank you to all our partners and everybody else who tuned in from afar. We appreciate you.
That's fantastic. We sure do. Um, well, thanks, Brian, for joining us this morning and doing all the work that you do behind the scenes to make this series and really the broader Dallas Housing Coalition a success. So thank you.
Appreciate you.
Of course. So, before we sign off today, we would like to encourage you to attend the Dallas Housing Coalition's next event, Packing City Hall for Parking Reform. That will be next Wednesday, May the 14th. We also encourage you to follow our socials and get updates on how to get involved with the Dallas Housing Coalition, and stay connected with our Housing for All webinar series. We also encourage you to visit our website, dallashousingcoalition.com, to learn more about our member individuals like Dr. Holman and join the coalition. We were really excited about all these bills and a lot of these things moving forward, and we're also really excited about some of the guests that we'll have on the Housing for All webinar series coming up in the next couple of weeks. As you mentioned, there are some runoffs and council elections. We're hoping to speak with some folks that are going for those runoffs for those elections, and some other great guests that we have coming up here in the next few weeks, just to learn and talk more about housing in Dallas and how we can move things forward. So. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you to our viewers for tuning into the 43rd Housing for All webinar, where we discuss whether Dallas is big and if it is truly big enough for everyone. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.